2 weeks ago, I had a consultation call with a student that said that he wanted to take his game to the next level. He wanted a one-on-one coaching relationship, and he thought I was the guy. A week after that, we did our first session, and I saw that the student's graph looked like this. And I thought, okay, we've got some work cut out. This isn't anything terrible, but this is, of course, the dreaded losing red line, lack of aggression, lack of investing money in good spots, not getting enough fold equity. We diagnosed a ton of stuff in Poker Tracker. We found that the probe turn, the stab flop, the c-bet, the turn c-bet, the river bluff frequency, all of these things were too low. We did a bit of protocol work. I wrote out some thought processes for the student. We worked in the trainer a bit. We reviewed a few hands, and a week later, I'm pleased to report, the graph now looks like this. Is everything totally fixed? No. Is this title a little bit clickbaity? Yes, but this is perhaps the most progress I've ever made in 1 week with a student. So massive kudos to the student. Shout out to you, my friend. You've done really well. Let's have a look at some of the hands this guy has played in the last week. We're going to look at some of the aggression that he's built into his game and see what we think of it. Enjoy the video. And don't forget, Grade E of the Carrot Poker School is now out at carrotcorner.com, where you can watch all your videos on site. No need to download any more files. Log in, grab a course, press play. It's that simple at Carrot Corner. Let's get into the video. The graph you see on your screen right now is a really typical before coaching graph that is sent to me before a coaching package begins. I always get my brand new students to send me a decent sample of their recent play so that I can figure out what they're struggling with and diagnose some focus areas to dive into in our first session. This graph here was sent over by the student who is going to be today's protagonist. As you can see, before we began coaching a couple of weeks ago, he was really struggling to get this red line off the ground. It was dragging down any profit the green line was really making, even though the blue line was quite healthy. That was happening more because the student was playing too tight, too passive. It's funny because when we began coaching, one of the student's main concerns was that he was bluffing too much and calling too much. And I said, no, it's quite the opposite. You're not taking advantage of fold equity in enough spots. And you're also probably not calling enough in overbluff situations or situations where you have a good bluff catcher blocker-wise to call with where there's no data to say that you should fold. So we got to work on this. We started plugging away at lots of different spots. We plugged away at probing the turn a bit more. We did a protocol for that in lesson 2. In lesson 1, which is actually the graph you're going to see is between lesson 1 and lesson 2. In lesson 1, we looked at loads of spots to be more aggressive. We looked at float betting the flop, c-betting the flop, c-betting the turn, bluffing throughout the course of the hand, that kind of thing. We did some work in a trainer, and I was really pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised, but really happy yesterday when the student sent over the hands in between. I also get private students to send over the hands they've played between lessons so I can see their game in its most recent state. And he sent this graph, which at first glance I was like, whoa, this red line is almost a bit too healthy. Is this a losing graph where we're just mindlessly aggroing now? Has the dreaded overgeneralized adjustment happened here? I have to be super careful as a coach because what sometimes happens in private coaching is that at the time of the session, the student understands everything you're saying, but as time goes on, memory begins to fade, and the overarching principle they sometimes take away from a coaching session is one that's way too general. A student might go away from a session and just remember, I need to be more aggressive. And when they do that, there's this real danger that they stop engaging with the spots that they're in and just mindlessly sort of revert to aggression whenever they're remotely unsure instead of trying to solve the spot. And I was worried that that might be what's happening here, but upon further review, I was really pleasantly surprised to find that this student had maybe over-adjusted a little bit in a few spots and was making a few bets with hands that I think I would have checked, but it wasn't widespread and it wasn't bad at all. And generally, most of the adaptations the student made were really good ones. So what we're going to do today is take a look at some of the aggression, the newfound aggression the student has begun to apply in his game after just 1 hour of coaching. Now, obviously, this title is a little bit clickbaity. I don't legitimately mean to say that I've fixed the student's entire game in just 1 hour of coaching. That would be really weird. But what we have done is got him to really understand why his tendencies were causing him to struggle and break even. And there's a mental block that's been lifted here. There's a big mental roadblock that's been lifted. And there's tons of aggression now flowing in healthy spots. So let's take a look at some of that. I think this first hand is a good example of the way the student is playing now that I really like. So button opens here. We're in the big blind with 7-6 suited. We go for the call. You could also 3-bet this node, of course. We decide to check, and villain bets about half pot. This is already a sizing that's definitely fine on this texture, but most of the people who make a sizing like this are going to be recreational players. It's just something to bear in mind. Not everyone. Some regs use this sizing, but in my experience, regs are at 50 NL. This comes from 50 Russian cash on GG. And I think that player pool of regs is very prone to just betting 1/3 on almost all textures in single raise pots, I would think. But we do decide to raise here, which is great. You're going to have some raise, you're going to have some call in GTO. If you think that people are overfolding to raise here and or betting too much of their range in the first place, then it makes a ton of sense to just revert to raise at a higher frequency or just maybe pure. I wouldn't be that worried about counter exploitability or like how often I'm raising this hand. I don't think that's a relevant consideration. Sometimes students are like, but won't I be over bluffing if I always raise? And it's like, yeah, but like, why do you assume there's something so wrong with over bluffing? If you want to use a mass data approach to this, and we do this in grade E of the Carrot Poker School that came out last week, then we'll see that loads of spots are so overfolded by the population. They're folding so often that not over bluffing like a madman or woman is actually going to be a mistake. So you actually have to over bluff to maximize win rate in overfolded situations. So don't throw about terms like over bluffing as if it's like a disease that you must avoid at all costs. It's just an exploitative deviation, and it might be the right one. On the Queen of Clubs turn, we decide to bet again. I think this is totally normal. You can probably give up this node as well, like if you really want to. I think these nodes get a bit over bluffed, and it's not a bad thing. I think they're also folded a fair amount on a turn like this, so that's okay. But I think people are getting to this turn with more draws and less value hands than they think. And then if you do follow through with every single draw, like bad flush draws and open enders, as well as like some gutters, you're going to be grossly overdoing it. But it might be okay, depending on the situation. I just want to point that out. So we go for the turn bet here, which is definitely fine, and I like, again, you're going to have some quota of equity to bet again in this kind of unfavorable landscape where you're out of position, your flop raise gets called, villain filters, your air largely doesn't improve. You're going to have something going on, and we do with the open end straight draw here, so going for the bet is fine. And then the Queen of Diamonds River, this is a really easy spot to underbluff, and it's actually a spot that I'd be really terrified in if I was button and I was facing Hero's Line. So one rule I have, and this is a very exploitative rule for bluffing, that I tell my private students is, if you can imagine a large part of your opponent's range that's deeply unhappy to face a certain sizing, there's a good chance that that spot is overfolded. That sounds a little bit fishy, like, oh, what do you mean he's unhappy? Well, what I mean is that we can picture a combinatorically broad region of the villain's range that is just going to be feeling like, shit, this is not an obvious call at all, I feel bad, I'm probably losing a lot. If there are a load of hands that fit that bill, generally speaking, very general rule here, the fold equity is going to be quite good. That's what we do here. We go for pot, which I actually love with this hand. I think this is great. You could get obsessed here about like, oh, well, I want a diamond blocker, but the thing is, like, you're just not going to get here with very many diamond blockers. Like, apart from the odd combo of King 10 offsuit with the King of Diamonds or something, and sure, you can bluff that on the river, you're going to have very few combos of natural bluffs remaining on this node. You're going to have almost none that contain a diamond. I mean, that means you're going to have to dip into the hands that don't contain a diamond. And here's the thing, you could have had clubs. You could easily have club here. A lot of your raises on the flop are backdoor, or at least the one club, like ace 10 with a club or something. So you're actually going to be in a spot where you have negative blockers sometimes. So when you have unblockers like this, that basically unblock the fold range of the opponent, they're not interfering with like aces, kings, queens. Not queens, sorry, that's quads. People don't fold quads. But you're not interfering with aces, kings, ace jack, king jack, jack 10, jack 9. All of these kind of hands. You are blocking other 7-6, but you can't have, you know, the world at your feet when you're bluffing there. You do sometimes have to have some negative blockers with some positive ones. But if you don't want to get like too into the rabbit hole of blockers, then the way to think about this is just that there is a large part of villain's range here from, you know, 5x to jack x to over pairs that is pretty uncomfortable here and is not going to be super happy about calling pot. If villain has a queen, like usually they're going to call. You will find the odd person that folds like queen x here occasionally, but it's rare. But yeah, the fold equity is decent for this line. It's definitely going to be a fine bluff, and it does get through this time, which is nice. Let's take a quick look at the solver here, see what that thinks. Let's just trace the action here. So we decided to raise this time against the flop bet. You can see that our hand 7-6 is doing a bit of that. Can call, it can raise, it doesn't really matter. I would recommend erring on the side of raising when you're playing against humans at these stakes. It's the best punish to people who are betting haphazardly on the flop, and that's a really common leak. People are betting way too much of their range, guys. It really is an epidemic at the micros and low stakes. So villain is meant to make a bunch of defense here with flush draws, with pocket pairs. You know, if they start folding hands like sixes, they begin to overfold already. So they're going to have to be pretty careful with that. Kind of ironic that like jack 10 does a little bit of folding, but sixes doesn't. It's just a blocker phenomenon. Like you'd rather have Jack 10 from the point of view of being more robust and having a bigger pair that's less vulnerable to being outdrawn, but from the point of view of blockers, you'd rather unblock like the 10, I guess it seems to be the case here. The 6 also has backdoor straight draws of its own. So yeah, weird that those two hands are so close in EV and that some of the Jack X actually begins to fold here, but not much of the pocket pair plus redraw does. So this goes raise call, Queen of Clubs turn, and you can see with the 7-6 we are betting again. There's a phenomenon here which is pretty cool to point out, which is that when we have the combo draw of diamonds or clubs, the solver thinks it's too gruesome a line when we're jammed on, and it does not want to reopen or doesn't want to open action while building the pot and creating a jammable stack to pot ratio with those hands. So it's actually just deciding to check here with the 7-6 of diamonds and clubs, which looks counterintuitive because us humans would be inclined to say, well, I'd rather have the combo draw than just the straight draw. But what you bet on the turn isn't just a question of raw equity. It's not just like what hand would you rather have. If you think that way, you're going to build your betting range in a totally unbalanced linear way where you're basically never bluffing, or you're only bluffing with really, really high equity hands and then value betting. And that's not really what you want to do. So in this situation, what matters is the difference in EV between betting and checking. And it just turns out that keeping the pot smaller, avoiding the jam line by checking is higher EV with 7-6 of diamonds in theory. And then it's indifferent with 7-6 of spades. But as I said in the hand review, you're allowed to just give up turn here with these hands. You don't actually have to do anything. If you do check and villain bets big, you know, you're just going to be in a terrible spot. You're going to have to fold. So that's not the end of the world. I mean, it sucks, but sometimes you have to take your medicine in spots like this where your range contains a lot of bluffs and villains in position with a range advantage. Okay, so it does go E75 or something thereabouts, filling calls, and the Queen of Diamonds comes on the river, and the solver here is actually basically saying that this is close to break even, but winning 1% pot here to go for a small bet. So the solver likes block betting here, which is interesting. A lot of people don't actually build block bet into their strategy here. It also doesn't mind a bigger bet too, by the way. I love this bet in practice. I think it's going to be nice. But the block bet here has a really cool function because like what happens on the river is that your range actually starts to pick up a lot of mediocre hands that you didn't have earlier. So when you raise the flop, you're kind of polarizing. You bet the turn, you're polarizing again, but when a flush comes in, you can have a bad flush now, and when the river is pairing the board, that bad flush is especially bad, so you have a lot of hands that are able to value bet, but not for a very big sizing, like the 8-5 of diamonds here or something like that, and that's exactly why the solver is building the smaller sizing into the toolkit in this spot. If you do bet small, there are lots of natural folds for villain. They could just have a bluff catcher like Jack 10 or Kings or something like that, and you could make some arguments about how Kings probably won't fold at these stakes, but then I think like top pair is folding quite a lot here, so it serves a purpose. The goal is not to maximize brute force fold equity at all costs. The goal is to get the best bang for your buck. It's to make the right risk reward ratios. So makes a lot of sense why you would have block bets in your strategy on a river that actually kind of merges your range a bit and gives you some really quite thin value hands. Overall, a well played hand from the student. If we just quickly look at like a bigger bet here, this isn't quite the pot size bet because we don't have that in the input here, but what is villain meant to fold? Well, they're usually meant to call aces, they're usually meant to call kings. You can see that this is actually like not that easy to do, and then they're going to have to find like bluff raise jams sometimes as well. So I think this spot is arguably fairly overfolded by many humans in the pool. So I like the river bet a lot. Okay, let's take a look at a few other hands there. That one was definitely like our main course for today. Let's have a look at some dessert though. This is the King 10 of Hearts under the gun getting cold called by the cutoff. Whenever you face a cold call from cutoff, you can quite safely assume that the odds of you being against a recreational player have just increased. Now, you don't know for sure that you're against a recreational player, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't use that evidence and adapt a little bit. So we do check the flop here. I think this is one of the flops against cold callers that we can build a betting range on. You guys have probably seen some sims on boards like 9-3 deuce and 10-7-4, Jack 9-3, where the solver just reverts to checking its whole range against what it perceives to be a strong cold call range that's kind of condensed and pocket pair heavy and set heavy on any board containing, you know, 2 or 3 medium cards. So no wonder the low boards are checked a lot, but this is a board that's very much in our favor. It bails us out of the original conundrum of being cold called by a more condensed range than ours, and so we're going to be doing okay here. So we can bet. We can also check though. I don't hate check here. I think recreational players in general, and remember this is more likely a recreational player now than not, are going to bet really quite erratically here. They're going to bet way too merged. They're not going to meet the right requirements for bluffing. They're going to bluff hands they shouldn't. So I'm a big fan of checking out of position to weaker players in general in single raise pots whenever you can. With a good hand, I think it's just a good play that overperforms, as long as you know that your opponent isn't of the very passive variety. So we decide to call here, which is good. I don't think raising makes a whole lot of sense with King 10. while you could quote unquote raise for value right now, you'd have to start slowing down later anyway, and so the investment ceiling, the eventual size of the pot that you want to create here, I don't think it's big enough that it makes any sense to raise this hand immediately. 4 of clubs turn, we decide to check again, villain checks back, and here's the thing, in GTO, villain isn't going to have a ton of worse hands that are calling a big bet here, and that's because if we rewind to the flop, they're not really going to be betting with very many medium strength hands, like they're not betting 9s or 10s or jacks or queen jack very often. They might bet some ace queen, and they may well bet like king jack, king queen, and some, I guess, king 9 suited if they have it, and then some sets and bluffs. So they're not going to be betting very often basically anyway, which is why we do a lot of bet ourselves on this texture. Generally, the less often your opponent's betting, when you have a strong range, the more often you should be betting. That's a GTO truth for you right there. So on the river, I think you can go for a block bet here in theory probably. You might be able to go for a slightly bigger bet as well. The sizing the student picks, this is verging on being a bit large in theory, I think, for the spot, just based on the expected polarization of cutoff's range on flop here. But because we're against a recreational player in all likelihood, we have to understand that they're going to be betting flop with way more combos of queen jack, ace queen, queen 10 than they should, and therefore I think there is enough stuff in villain's range calling this sizing to make this an okay value bet. I might still go a bit smaller. The other option is to check. If we think villain's range pre-flop is really, really wide, then we could consider checking and just throwing some rope if we think they're drowning in air hands. But when we have the 10, we're going to block some combos like ace 10. Usually, in theory, you want to bet this hand just for small sizing in this spot. I like sizing up a bet against a suspected fish because they are going to have more combos like this ace queen and also like queen jack, queen 10 and pocket 10s, pocket jacks. They're going to have 10-9. Who knows, they might have 10-9 off if they're really bad, or queen 7 suited. And the more they could have a hand like king 5 suited or king 7 suited, basically the wider their pre-flop range gets, the more sense it makes to choose a bigger sizing on this river. Pocket potatoes here. If you don't know why these are called the pocket potatoes, you will never know, ever. We go for the 3-bet and villain 4 bets. This sizing is fine, I guess. Looks kind of reggy, quite precise, 23.4. I think jam is totally normal here. In fact, jam is probably the front runner play. Are you ever allowed to like slow play this actually? I pulled up a little sim here. This is the same sims that the solved ranges on the Carrot Corner solved range store are built with. This is the 100 NL rake structure 1, and it's close enough to the 50 NL rake probably. And we can see here that 10s, when it gets 3-bet here, and then 4-bet by small blind, and then it's playing pure jam, and it is actually an EV loss to just call here. There's two things going on basically in this spot. One is we want to deny equity to the bluffing range, which is really live. You know, people have 2 big cards above 10s quite often, ace-x suited that's 32% or something. They just have a lot of hands that are super live, so when you do get a fold in this spot by jamming, it's pretty damn useful. So I do think that jam is just the play that we should be making here. I think fear can seep in here where the student really like gets protective over a stack and tries to avoid losing a stack to aces. Like if you have 10s against aces, blind versus blind, you're supposed to lose a stack. Like that's okay. Let's not go around trying to protect ourselves from the kind of inevitable coolers of poker. But at the same time, let's not brandish the word cooler irresponsibly and call things coolers that aren't. So there's a happy medium there for sure. So I don't really like this. I think just jam and end everything here and deny equity. And also, like if you're tired or you're not feeling like you want to play a 4-bet pot, you've got action going on in other tables, you've got another big pot going on. Jam just means you don't have to think about it anymore, right? Although I do see students jam here and then stare at the run out and time out on another table while they're doing it. Results-oriented creatures as humans to our detriment in poker. Ace, King, Queen, monotone, possibly one of the worst boards ever, but we do have the royal flush draw at least. Small bet from small blind 4-better here. I mean, I guess you just call. I don't see why you would do a lot of raise in this spot in general. I think you just call here pretty happy. Goes check, check. And this is such a capping check by villain here. They're basically saying that they have like ace, king, ace, jack, king, jack. This is the easiest jam I've ever seen as a bluff. Jam is going to probably realize like 90% fold equity in this spot. Like how can you really be bluffing? I guess you can have like, actually you could overbluff like a psycho here now I think about it. If you jam 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s, and some 6s with a heart here, yeah, you're really overdoing it. That said, I don't think it matters. I think this is one of these spots where you should overbluff at these stakes, and you should be willing to just put yourself out there and say, hey, I'm jamming a bazillion combos of pocket pair plus heart, and you're going to overfold your ace 10. You're not going to protect your range. You're not going to have trips plus enough, and you're not going to call me with a king or an ace. So just sticking it in here is a brute force exploitative play. probably in theory, if we get to the spot with enough combos of lower pairs, which we do, we're not even meant to have 10s or jacks here, then we probably do something like jam the 6s, jam the 7s, jam the 8s, and then at some point, like the 9s, maybe we start checking and not jamming anymore. But we have a ton of value here as well. We can have king, queen, ace, queen. We can have our fair share of boats here. We can have jack 10. So I think jamming here just makes a ton of sense as played anyway. I would just guess that you need about 50% fold equity here. You're betting just less than pot. I'd imagine our showdown value is nil. Like, I'd imagine if we check here, we lose every single fucking time. Maybe they have like 9s without a heart. Sometimes it's just giving up. Maybe our showdown value is like 4%. I'd imagine it's close enough to zero that if we're getting 60 to 65% fold equity with a shove, we need to shove. And I think we're getting 75 to 80. I would say this is folded 3/4 of the time or more at these stakes by a reg, because the regs at these stakes are generally not like super GTO warrior regs that are like finding check calls on the river. And anyway, like villains should be folding a lot of the time here in theory as well, because their range kind of sucks now after checking twice. They're not really meant to play that many value hands that way, though they are meant to play some. So I really like the play here. More evidence that the student is really going from strength to strength, sorting out this red line and playing really nice poker in an exploitative spot where fold equity is very much up for grabs. Look out for these, punish capped ranges, and be merciless in a game like 50 Russian cash. Deuces. Okay, what's going to happen here? We are on the button. Ooh. I mean, you just want to fold probably, although this is a recreational player, so I don't know. Do we go this wide? We do have some incentive to get involved a bit lighter against the recreational side of the pool, but Deuces is kind of losing in theory from these positions, and also, like, you're getting raked pre when they fold. Like, GG's horrible for that, so you should know that, by the way, guys. If you play on GG Poker, they do rake you in a 3-bet pot that doesn't go to the flop when someone opens you 3-bet and they fold. So you want to know that and factor that in. Villain calls, queen 10-4 rainbow, really good board for range. I'm a fan of a small bet here. Your hand is functioning as what we call a denial bluff in the Carrot Poker School. We're denying equity to worse hands that are really live. Like if villain has 8-7, they still have 2 overs to our hand. If they have ace-5, they're folding the flop, but they still have 2 overs to our hand. Well, usually they are. Therefore, we can bet for denial. We can also bet as a bluff because villain could fold 5s or 6s or 7s to our bet on the flop. So there are kind of elements of both. There's also a few good branches where we win the pot with the deuces when we get called. There's the branch where villain is a bad passive fish that calls flop with ace-jack and doesn't bluff later, and we just win with deuces. There's also the branch where we bink a deuce and win an entire stack or most of one or part of one. So there's a lot of good branches here that can happen. Villain calls the c-bet. Do we want to go nuts on turn here? Probably not. Like, I think we have hands here that we want to bluff that have less showdown value than this, that aren't winning as often on the check-check. No, this is winning sometimes. That have more improvability. This has very little. Probably this is a check, but it's not the worst bluff in the world, probably, but I think it's a check. We do check. Villain goes for a block on the river, and we do this. Wow, okay, cool. So what we're saying here is that we have slow played. Not slow played as such, but maybe we have a hand like Queen X, right? So if we had like Ace Queen or something, we could check that turn at some frequency, low frequency, but some. We could raise river. If we had King Queen with a heart blocker, we can probably raise river, although I don't know if I'd go that big with King Queen. And we can certainly raise, of course. The main part of our value range here is the Queen 9 of hearts, Queen Jack of hearts, and nut flush, right? These are the most common value hands we have here. The deuce doesn't matter, so if you're looking at this deuce like, oh, I block flushes, yes, hurrah! Hooray for me, I'm clever, I block all the flushes. No, you don't. Like, no one has a deuce. This is a fucking 3-bet pot. Like, nobody has a deuce. If you're going on about the deuce of hearts blocker here, guys, you don't deserve to play the game. You guys ever tire of that? Is that skit getting old? Do we need a new skit? Let me know in the comments. So this is probably just the same as raising with some random hand. At least the deuces don't like block any of the folding range. So what does villain actually have here? Let's like do a bit of exploitative hand reading. Villain probably has ace 10, king 10, jack 10, pocket jacks, pocket 9s because recreational players do weird mergy shit. Lots of hands like that, really. Some Queen X as well, but not that much. How much of villain's range is feeling uncomfortable and horrible in this spot? Probably quite a lot of it, to be honest. Like, all second pair hands and worse are probably folding at a pretty high frequency here. We're risking 35 to win, what, 30? We need about 53%, 54%, maybe 55. Fold equity, something like that. I feel quite good about this. I feel like we're probably hitting that target. I don't think we're getting as much fold equity in this hand as we were in the last one, but I think we're probably still raking in about, I don't know, 60% fold equity in this spot with this line. So I think this is another really well-found play here by Hero. Sure, sometimes you'll run into like a station that has the exact thought of, oh, you checked the turn, therefore I don't believe you. That can happen, and if that happens, so be it. But a lot of people will just go off of their absolute hand strength here and say, well, I only have Jack 10 and I don't want to call this big raise with Jack 10. River raises are generally not bluffed that often. I'm going to fold. So we do get called this time, and we get looked up by a hand that was never ever folding in a million years. This is actually like a GTO play. Maybe this isn't a fish after all. They were just shorter stacked pre. Yeah, they did start without a full stack. But like when you have the queen here, it makes a ton of sense to size down. Because if you size up, the main thing not the main thing, but one thing you're trying to be called by on a regular basis is a queen. So when you block a queen, it makes a bit more sense with your flush to take a line that gets raised sometimes by bluffs and just makes money in other ways, basically. I'm trying very hard here not to use the word targeting because it's a horrible word and I will never use it on my own channel or anywhere else. So if you ever catch me saying targeting sincerely, not to rip it to shreds as a terrible term, but to actually use it in a poker sentence, then you should unsubscribe to this channel if you see me do that in future, okay? Promise me that, guys. Unsubscribe if you ever see me do that. Okay, so this was a lot of fun. I think overall, this is the most progress I've made for quite some time in one session with a student. We had a second session since then, as I said, and I just feel like we're making a ton of progress. So I'll maybe check back in with you, let you know how this student is doing. The students are obviously anonymous. It wouldn't be fair to them to name them and show their screen names and stuff. But I will, when I do that, I'll refer back to past videos and say, oh, this is the guy from This Guy Was Cured in One Session video, whatever. This is a bit of a clickbaity title. I don't mean to say that I fixed everything in the student's game. Of course not. But man, what a load of progress we've made over a short space of time. Absolutely thrilled about this one. If you want to get some private coaching yourself, you can check out my rates at carrotcorner.com and my coaching deals. You can also, if you want a more economical option and you're starting out in poker, I'd recommend the Carrot Poker School and Grade E. Of course, the exploitative mass data part of that came out last week. Videos are all now watchable at Carrot Corner as well, by the way, directly on site. No more need for bulky downloads. So that's exciting. The channel's growing nicely. You guys have been amazing for commenting and liking and subscribing, and you're really helping me grow the channel. So a massive thank you to all of you, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye for now.